In connection with a decades-old murder case. Let's listen.
Lieutenant Richard Vitale, our Chief of Homicide, Adrian Lynch, the Chief of our Cold Case Unit, Dave Sollett, and Assistant District Attorney, Jamie Charles. This is a very bittersweet day because just over half a century ago, on June 10th, 1971, Natalie Scheublin, who was then a 54-year-old wife and mother, was violently murdered in her own home in Bedford. Today, we were able to call her son and daughter and tell them that we were taking the first step in holding to account the alleged perpetrator. This morning, a Middlesex County grand jury indicted Arthur Lewis Massey, age 76, on the charge of first-degree murder in connection with tying up Natalie Scheublin, stabbing her multiple times, and then striking her in the head, causing her death. We know that in the early evening of Thursday, June 10th, 1971, Natalie's husband, Raymond Scheublin, the president of the Lexington Trust Bank, returned from work to find the body of his wife in the basement of the home. Mrs. Scheublin was face down on the floor, her ankles were tied together, and there was a makeshift gag around her neck. Mr. Scheublin immediately called the Bedford Police Department, and officers were there within minutes. Based on the state of her body, it appeared that Mrs. Scheublin had only been dead for a short time. An autopsy subsequently determined that Mrs. Scheublin had been stabbed with a knife multiple times and struck with an unidentified object, which caused a massive blunt force injury to her head. Nothing of significant value was taken from the home, but what was missing was Mrs. Scheublin's car, a blue and white 1969 Chevrolet Impala. On the day of the murder, police immediately began canvassing the area, interviewing neighbors, and looking for that car. By 8:42 p.m. on June 10th, the police had found the car in the parking lot of the nearby VA hospital, less than half a mile from the Scheublin home. Although the car appeared to have been intentionally wiped down to remove fingerprints, police were able to observe and collect several latent prints from it, including one from the passenger side back window. Police at the time followed several leads, but were not able to identify a suspect. That investigation continued, and then in 1999, fingerprint examiners from the Massachusetts State Police used what was then a new tool, the FBI's automated fingerprint identification system, known to many of you as AFIS, to attempt to identify that print that had been found on the Impala and the other latent prints that had been found at the crime scene. Through AFIS, they were able to identify the defendant, Mr. Massey, as a candidate for review. A subsequent analysis of the print from the car window by state police fingerprint expert confirmed that that print recovered from the victim's car matched the defendant's left thumb. Police then interviewed Mr. Massey, who denied ever having been in Bedford or having any knowledge of the murder. Over the course of the investigation, police had occasion to speak to Mr. Massey again. At that time, he allegedly claimed that he had been solicited by an organized crime associate to murder the wife of a banker and to make the murder look like a break-in. He claimed that he had turned down that job that was offered to him. I want to be clear that throughout this investigation, evidence have found nothing to corroborate that Mr. Scheublin ever put out a contract on his wife or was in any way involved in his wife's death. That is merely the story that police were told by Mr. Massey. Police continued to pursue potential leads, looking at similar crimes and a range of suspects. The police during that time, and this is partly how we were able to get to where we are today, they were meticulous about documenting tips and leads and following initial forensic leads, although obviously the technology we have today was not available in 1971. In 2019, following my creation of the cold case unit in this office, we again focused on this case. Throughout 2020 and 2021, Massachusetts State Police troopers, as well as the Bedford detectives, carefully examined the case, gathered information about the defendant's past, and sought to identify additional witnesses. During the course of this wide-ranging investigation, the police were able to identify a woman who admitted that she had been involved with Massey in schemes to defraud banks during the 1990s. She told the police that Mr. Massey habitually carried a knife and that he had bragged to her that he had previously killed someone with a knife. That information, along with other facts developed during the investigation, was presented to the Middlesex grand jury, which returned that indictment for murder today. This situation, being able to go to a family over 50 years later and tell them that we have taken the first step in holding someone accountable, that we have kept our promise that we will never give up, is exactly what we envisioned when I created the cold case unit in 2019. Putting our resources into a case, meticulously examining every detail and seeing what else can be done. In this case, our investigators poured through old records, developed information, and this indictment today is truly the culmination of years of investigative work. I am truly grateful, as is the family, and they've asked me to express that gratitude to all of the law enforcement partners who worked tirelessly to ensure that we would get to this day. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Fong, then I'll be happy to take some questions, but I would note that in speaking to Mrs. Scheublin's son and daughter, they have asked. Obviously, this comes as news that is both welcome and a great surprise, and they have asked that their privacy be respected during this difficult time. And it is also our expectation that Mr. Massey will be arraigned in the Woburn Superior Court at some point tomorrow. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Fong.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm hopeful that the arrest in this case today will provide some closure and sense of justice for Natalie Scheublin's family, as well as for the residents of Bedford who were shocked by this brutal crime. I want to thank all the officers, investigators, and prosecutors who worked on this investigation, from the officers that responded to the initial crime scene to the officers that participated in the arrest today, and all the others along the way. There was a tremendous amount of investigative work. There was a lot of persistence and determination that went into supporting this investigation, and today we've successfully made an arrest. And while today's arrest can make the pain of Natalie's loss feel fresh, I'm hopeful that the family members who have lived so long without answers will finally find some closure today from today's news, and my best wishes go out to the family of Natalie Scheublin. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I'm happy to take some questions. Our belief at this point is that all of the evidence is consistent with there having been a break-in in the house, and that either an expectation that Mrs. Scheublin would not be in the house or her return to the house at an inopportune point.
Did the suspect have any criminal past?
That's something we'll be talking about tomorrow in court.
There is an indication there's a record of someone by that name having once escaped from the Salem jail. Is it the same person?
All things we'll talk about tomorrow.
Where was he arrested?
He was arrested at his home in Salem, Massachusetts today.
Where was he? Was he living in Bedford at the time of the homicide?
We have no information to indicate that, no. Right now, there is no information to indicate that he had any connection to the Scheublin family or to the VA hospital. They just appear to have been convenient locations.
But are you saying this was just a random murder? This suspect just arrived?
We have nothing to suggest that it wasn't random, no. No known connection between this family, this house, and the suspect.
What triggered you to go for an indictment was this woman who came forward and said she had spoken with him about a knife and his admission. Is that the only?
Well, we have his fingerprint on the window of the car that was removed from the house and located within hours of finding Mrs. Scheublin's body.
And when did you get that fingerprint again?
Well, that was found on the car back then in June. So what's interesting is, so think back, 1971, remember, Richard Nixon is president. We do not have the technology that we have today. At that point, when you found a fingerprint, the only way to match a print was to have a print to match it with. So police did as much as was possible. They never were able to identify that print. Fast forward to 1999. At that point, there's APHIS, where you're able to put a print in. It's populated with over 40,000 prints at that point, and it's possible that it will shoot out prints that are potential matches. Then there has to be a hand match by an expert. It essentially takes you back to where you would have been. You have a print that's a potential match and the print that you recovered, and you can do that match. So that, at the time, in 1971, they had a print. They couldn't find a match for that print. It was only when the print was entered into APHIS in '99 that they got a possibility. And it's not, APHIS doesn't make a match, it just tells you this is a possible match, and then you still go through the same process of a state police examiner doing that by hand match.
So his name surfaced in 1999. He's been on your radar, so to speak,
Yes.
since 1999?
Yes.
How did his print get into APHIS that showed up?
I don't know that. I mean, there's lots of ways your prints can be in there.
It's not necessarily because it was printed in a book.
That is likely, but it's not necessarily the case.
And you actually made, the state police investigator, he actually made that match when again?
He made the actual match following that 1999, so somewhere in 99, 2000.
Okay.
What's your message to people that think they can get away with murder?
Well, the message is twofold, as I said. It is, first of all, to those families that are waiting for answers. And, as you can imagine, for the Scheublins, this has been a horribly long wait, that we make a commitment that we will not give up, and we do not give up. But the message has to be equally clear to perpetrators that we are not giving up. One of the most striking things today in the conversations with the family was the family talking about, we think about sort of being frozen in time. I know you have a photograph of Mrs. Scheublin, and she had 2 children at the time. But the impact that it has on family members, as her son and daughter talked about today, their children and grandchildren, who were not alive at the time Mrs. Scheublin was killed. But it never leaves a family to have this kind of situation, and certainly to have it be unresolved for all of these decades.
Was he arrested without incident?
He was arrested without incident.
Can you talk about the challenges of trying a case where the facts are 50 years old, more than 50 years old, if this case goes to trial?
Well, obviously there are some witnesses who are not with us, and we have to build a case without that. There are some of the initial investigators, obviously, who have passed on, and we build the case without that. But we are confident, as was the grand jury in returning the indictment, that we have sufficient evidence to proceed at this point, from the witnesses we have that are alive, as well as records and documents, all of that.
Chief, can I ask you, she mentioned investigators who were passed on. Are there investigators who worked on this case in the past that you kept up to date on this, and can I get how they're reacting to this? If you would step to the mic.
Sure. We have, I believe we have one investigator who's retired and currently still around. I believe he's been notified, or will be notified shortly, and most of the other people that have worked in this case have passed on. Thank you.
And obviously there are generations of people that work on a case over 50 years, and we've reached out to many of those people. And as I said, it is a real testament to the scope of the investigation that was done at the time, and particularly to the meticulous way in which people over time, as they did that investigation, really documented what they had. That when we began re-looking at this, you can sort of go backwards and figure that out. Because obviously the people who were collecting evidence and doing things in 1971 could not have anticipated that we would have the kinds of resources we have today. But they kept track of it and documented it all, so it was available.
Chain of custody.
Yes.
And how old was she when she was killed?
She was 54.
Could you please spell Mr. Massey's last name?
Yes. M-A-S-S-E-I.
What's Mr. Massey been doing for the past 50 years after he allegedly murdered this woman?
That's probably something we'll hear about tomorrow as well.
Has he been working and having a family and living in this area and thinking that he was going to get away with murder?
So far as we know, he has continued to be in this area. I don't know the details of his personal life. I'm sorry.
They recovered the knife at the scene, or they never recovered the knife that he stabbed?
No,
No.
we didn't recover it, no. No.
Can you talk a little bit more about the woman who came forward and had a conversation with him that triggered your...
She indicated that she, in the 1990s, was involved in a number of essentially check kiting or bank scam kinds of things that during that period of time she came to know Mr. Massey fairly well, that Mr. Massey routinely carried a knife with him, and that he had bragged in her presence that he had once killed a person with a knife. And we know that from the autopsy that Mrs. Scheublin was stabbed on both sides of her chest with a knife.
Is this someone that came forward or someone that you found and was able to solicit this testimony?
It is, finding her was the result of the investigation that was ongoing.
So she didn't come forward spontaneously and say, I have.
Right.
You found her.
Yes. Yes. Right.
What's it like to find a person who killed someone 50 years later?
Well, I think it is, first of all, for the officers who have put, folks from our office who put so much time into this, it's incredibly gratifying to finally get to a place where the evidence that you've been developing and presenting to the grand jury is sufficient for the grand jury to return an indictment. And it is, as I began, it is very bittersweet to call a family 50 years later. And first of all, you are obviously opening up something that happened a very long time ago, but to be able to tell them that people did not forget, in this case, their parent. You know, remember, Mr. Scheublin died never knowing what had happened to his wife. Her son and daughter have never known. And to be able to tell them that we've taken the first important step in holding somebody accountable for that.
So your message to other possible suspects out there and other unsolved killers?
We do not give up. We make a commitment that we will get to the answers, and we do not give up. And it may take us 50 years, but we are always looking at things and trying to move cases forward. Thank you all very much.
We've been listening to Middlesex District Attorney Marion Ryan, along with Bedford Police, announcing that a man has been arrested in a 50-year-old murder case in Bedford, Mass. 76-year-old Arthur Lewis Massey has been charged with first-degree murder in connection with the killing of 54-year-old Natalie Scheublin in Bedford back on June 10th, 1971. Massey is accused of tying Scheublin up inside her home, stabbing her multiple times, and then striking her head with a blunt object. Massey will be arraigned tomorrow in Woburn District Court, and we will take a break now. Be back with more news, weather, and sports right after this.